Chapter 6, Part 2 of Explorers and Travelers by Adolphus W. Greely. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Chapter 6, Zebulon, Montgomery Pike, Explorer of the Sources of the Mississippi and Arkansas Rivers, Part 2. It appears that foreign emissaries at St. Louis had sent word to the authorities of New Spain of Pike's contemplated expedition, and steps were immediately taken to defeat its objects. The command of the Spanish force was assigned to Lieutenant Don Facundo Malgares, an officer of reputation in Indian warfare, who collected 100 dragoons and 500 militia at Santa Fe, New Mexico. Each man was mounted, had 3 led animals, and 6 months' supply of ammunition. First, they descended the Red River about 700 miles, with the expectation of meeting and turning back Pike, but learning that no force had passed that way. The Spanish commander, after holding a council with the Comanches for the purpose of winning them over to the interests of New Spain, then turned north to the Arkansas. Here Malgares put in camp 240 of his men, with the worn-out and disabled stock, and with the rest proceeded to the Pawnee village, where he distributed medals, Spanish flags, etc., and after prejudicing them against Americans and drawing the Pawnee chiefs as closely to Spain as possible, returned to Santa Fe, arriving there in October. This armed invasion of the acknowledged territory of the United States and deliberate tampering with the Indian tribes probably arose from the strained relations between the two countries, which nearly resulted in hostilities on the frontiers of Texas and Orleans Territory in 1806, when the local forces tacitly agreed to regard the Sabine River as a temporary boundary. Pike first made the Osage and Kaws smoke the pipe of peace, and then held a council with the Pawnees. These latter Indians, strongly impressed by the grand show made by the Spanish cavalry, regarded with doubt the small force of Americans. What Pike lacked in numbers and display, he made up in boldness of demands and in display of self-confidence. He obliged them to take down the Spanish flag and hoist the American ensign, but gave them permission to retain the foreign flag for protection if the Spaniards should return. The chief, however, insisted that the Americans must turn back, and said that he would resist any advance by force of arms. Captain Pike, already indignant at the unauthorized raid of the Spaniards into the territory of the United States, listened with impatience to this threat, and answered that so far he had not seen any blood on his path, but the Pawnees must know that the young warriors of their great American father were not women, to be turned back by words; that they were men, well armed and prepared as braves to sell their lives dearly; that they should go on, and if the Pawnees opposed, the great American father would send other warriors to avenge the dead. This bold talk had its effect, and the onward march met with no active opposition. Striking southwest, and following as well as he could the broad trail left by the Spaniards, Pike reached Arkansas, where he stopped long enough to build canoes, in which Lieutenant Wilkinson, with 5 soldiers and 2 Osages, descended the river. This officer reached the post of Arkansas on January 6, 1807, after a journey marked by many hardships, but no great dangers. Captain Pike and Dr. Robinson pursued their route up the Arkansas with a party, now reduced to 14 soldiers, and the interpreter, Vasquez. On the 2nd of November they fell in with a large herd of wild horses, beautiful bays, blacks, and grays, whom they were unable to capture even with their fleetest coursers. Here also the buffalo were present in numbers beyond imagination, as Pike thought. The 15th of November was a marked day, for Pike records that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon I thought I could distinguish a mountain to our right, which appeared like a small blue cloud. In half an hour they appeared in full view before us. When our small party arrived on the hill, they with one accord gave 3 cheers to the Mexican mountains. The peak, first seen by Pike, remained in view from that day to the 27th of January, and in eternal commemoration of the hardships and dangers of the discoverer in that journey, fittingly bears it our day the name of Pike's Peak. Here they first strikingly realized the transparency and purity of the mountain air, which to the eye quite annihilates distance. He writes, marched at our usual hour, pushed with an idea of arriving at the mountains, but found at night no visible difference in their appearance from what we did yesterday. It may be added that 8 days' march brought the party only to the base of the mountains. On November 22d he fell in with an unsuccessful war party, composed of 60 Pawnees returning from a foray on the Comanches. The savages at first acted in a friendly manner, but receiving some small presents, demanded ammunition, corn, blankets, kettles, and indeed everything they saw. Being refused, they threw away in contempt the articles given. Pike ordered the horses packed, when the Pawnees encircled the small party and commenced stealing everything they could, when Pike commanded his men to stand to arms and to separate themselves from the savages. This done, an order was given to kill the first Indian who touched any piece of baggage, when the Pawnees, realizing that further misconduct meant fight, filed off and allowed them to depart. The party was now at the present city of Las Animas, where the Arkansas forks, and as the Spanish troops followed the main stream instead of the Purgatory, Pike took the same route. At the Herfuano he decided to put the main party in camp while he explored the surrounding country. So he threw up a small breastwork opening on the river, somewhat to the east of the present city of Pueblo. Starting to ascend the North Fork, the main Arkansas, to the high point of a blue mountain, which he conceived would be 1 day's march, it took 2 days to reach the base and more than another day to reach its summit. He records that his men had no stockings, were clad only in light summer overalls, in every way unprovided for the inclement surroundings, the snow to their hips, the temperature 9 degrees below freezing, while in 48 hours the 4 men had for food only 1 partridge and a piece of deer's rib, but adds that they were amply compensated for their toil and hardships by the sublimity of the view, an unbounded prairie overhung with clouds. The summit of Grand Pike's Peak, bare of vegetation, snow-covered, and double the height of the peak ascended, he thought no human being could then have ascended, even had it been near instead of a day's march to its base. The December journey up the narrow, cliff-bound valley of the Arkansas is a continuous record of hardship and suffering. The horses with difficulty found grazing in the snow-covered valley, while the fearless ravens lighted on the men seized meat from them and, despite the kicking and plunging of the horses, swooped down on them and picked their sore backs till they bled. The thermometer fell to 38 degrees below freezing, while the badness of the trail obliged the party to cross and recross the ice-filled river, from which several froze their feet badly. Had the weather continued so cold, some of the men, says Pike, must have perished, for they had no winter clothing. I wore myself cotton overalls. Here the returning Spanish expeditionary column under Malgares had turned south, skirting the mountains until it reached a practicable pass through the Cimarron range to Taos. But the main Spanish trail failing in the snow-covered plain, Pike pursued a side trail to the northwest, and, crossing a dividing ridge, came on an ice-covered stream which, to his surprise, ran to the northeast, and proved, as he thought, to be the headwaters of the Platte, the South Fork rising in the South Park where he then was. Here he found evidences of the park having been lately frequented by large parties of Indians. Beyond this he doubtless crossed into the Middle Park and saw the headwaters of the Colorado Grande, and so was the second party to reach from the Atlantic tidewater the sources of streams draining into the Pacific. Pike was now lost in the maze of snow-covered mountains under most adverse circumstances. As he recites, 800 miles from the frontiers of our country, not one person clothed for the winter, many without blankets, having been obliged to cut them up for socks, etc., laying down at night on the snow or wet ground, one side burning while the other was pierced with cold, endeavoring to make of raw buffalo hide a miserable substitute for shoes, the men falling sick, and finally the country so broken and precipitous that even the Indian horse could not carry a pack, and 3 animals were lost from falls and bruises. Pike was disconsolate, but not discouraged. He sent ahead the interpreter and 2 soldiers traveling light to find a way out, while making 5 small sleds to carry the baggage and be dragged by the men he followed. Struggling on, nearly perishing from cold and almost famished for food, the 5th of January found Pike, greatly to his mortification, in the same old valley of the Arkansas, in sight of his camp of December 10th. Realizing that he could expect nothing further from his few worn out horses, and burning with mortification at his egregious error in considering the Arkansas as the Red, Pike decided to try on foot that journey which had failed on horseback. He at once strengthened the small fort, left therein heavy baggage, horses, etc., with the interpreter and one man, while with the rest he started to cross the mountains with packs in search of the Red River, where he intended to send back a party to guide the pack train to it. This in the belief that the Red River had its sources to the southwest, instead of in its true location, hundreds of weary miles to the southeast. Humboldt's map of New Spain, compiled from the data in the city of Mexico in 1804, plainly indicates that the Spanish labored under the same error as Pike, they also thinking the sources of the Red River to be some 200 or 300 miles northwest of their true position. This map shows that although the main Red was well known, yet the headwaters of the Canadian were believed to be, and were charted as, the northwest extension of the Red to within 50 miles of the place where Pike was later arrested. It may be added, as showing the extent of geographical knowledge in New Spain at that time, that the upper Arkansas was known under the name Rio Napastli, although its connection with the lower Arkansas was only suspected. The Pecos, Colorado, Trinity, and Sabine rivers were also known, but the Llano Estacado of Texas and the plains of Colorado, Indian Territory, and Kansas, though they had been crossed here and there prior to 1805, were practically unknown lands, given over to the buffalo and savages who were popularly and correctly associated with them. Impressed with the belief that he finally was on the right track, Captain Pike, on January 14, 1806, started on the eventful journey that was to carry him into New Spain, and led him into the hands of the Spaniards he was charged to avoid. They marched in heavy order, every one, man, doctor, and commander, carrying 45 pounds of regular baggage, besides arms, ammunition, and such food as he thought proper, the average burden being 70 pounds per man, to be carried over a snow-covered and mountainous country. The general direction followed was to the northwest, and 50 miles were made good in 3 days. The 4th day, all wet, their feet crossing a stream, and before fire could be had, no less than 9 of the men, including the 2 hunters, had their feet badly frozen. The temperature fell that night to 43 degrees below the freezing point, while the lack of game left them without food. The next morning 2 men went hunting in one direction, while Pike and the doctor went in another. The latter 2 wounded a buffalo 3 times, but he escaped. When, says Pike, we concluded it was useless to go home to add to the general gloom, and went among the rocks, where we encamped and sat up all night. From intense cold it was impossible to sleep, hungry and without cover. The next morning they struck a herd and wounded several buffalo, all of which escaped. By this time, continues Pike, I had become extremely weak and faint, being the 4th day since we had received sustenance. We were inclining our course to a point of woods, determined to remain absent and die by ourselves rather than to return to our camp and behold the misery of our poor lads, when we discovered a gang of buffalo. Fortunately they killed one and returned at once to camp with a heavy load of meat, Pike arriving in such a state of exhaustion that he almost fell fainting as he dropped his burden. The men, he adds, had not a frown nor a desponding eye, yet not a mouthful had they ate for 4 days. It was found that 2 soldiers were so badly frozen that it was impossible for them to proceed, and indeed it was probable that one would lose his feet. To remain was apparent death for all, so Pike decided to march, and left the 2 men, John Sparks and Thomas Doherty, provided with ammunition and given all the buffalo meat except 1 meal for the marching column. It was like parting with the dying. Pike bade them face their possible fate with soldierly fortitude, assured them that relief would be sent as soon as possible, and then they parted, as we may well believe such comrades would, with tears, more doubtless from those who marched than from those who remained behind. The main party under Pike struggled on over the barren, snow-covered mountains, and after 9 days, 2 of which without food, a march of 95 miles from the vicinity of Saguache to the neighborhood of Del Norte brought them quite exhausted to the banks of the Rio Grande, which was, however, hailed as the long-expected Red River. Descending the stream some distance, Pike established a picketed stockade, surrounded it by a water ditch, and made it quite impregnable to any ordinary attack. On February 7th, Corporal Jackson and 4 men were sent back across the mountain to bring in the baggage and see if the frozen men were yet able to travel. The same day, Dr. Robinson left the expedition to visit Santa Fe, ostensibly carrying the papers in a Spanish claim, but in reality to gain a knowledge of the country, the prospects of trade, the military force, etc. In short, as a secret agent. When Pike was strengthening his position and securing game, the party returned with word that the frozen men could not yet travel, and possibly might be crippled for life. Volunteers were called for, as the only method now was to send to the fort in the forks of the Arkansas, near Pueblo, where the recuperated horses and the rear guard were available to bring over the snow-clad mountains the helpless soldiers. Regarding this last journey, Pike writes, "I must here remark the effect of habit, discipline, and example in 2 soldiers, Sergeant William E. Meek and Private Theodore Miller, soliciting a command of more than 180 miles over 2 great ridges of mountains covered with snow, inhabited by bands of unknown savages. These men volunteered it, with others, and were chosen, for which they thought themselves highly honored. The steadfast endurance and unfailing fortitude which enabled Pike's men to withstand and overcome the horrors and hardships of famine, frost, and fatigue form but a single page of the annals of our army. Rarely has the American soldier failed, in war or peace, for military or civic ends, to give to the accomplishment of any important trust his utmost endeavor, subordinating thereto comfort, health, and life, lavishing thereon resources of helpfulness which have so often crowned with success the most hopeless of enterprises. If the American has individuality, assertiveness, and self-reliance, he has also, in its good time and place, a spirit of obedience, subordination, and solidarity, which make him the typical soldier." On February 16th, Pike was visited by a Spanish dragoon and an Indian, and some 10 days later by a Spanish officer and 50 dragoons, by whom he was escorted to Santa Fe, where he was examined by the Spanish governor, Don Alencastre, on March 3rd. Pike had been informed by the Spanish lieutenant that he would be conducted to the head waters of the Red River, but at Santa Fe he learned that there was no intention of permitting a geographical exploration of these unknown regions. Pike was astonished to find in Santa Fe an American, a Kentuckian named James Pursley, from Bairdstown, who had made a hunting trip to the head of the Osage in 1802, and in 1803 made a journey up the Missouri with a French trader. Sent on a trading trip on the plains with a roving band of Kioways, the hunting party was attacked and driven by the Sioux into the parks of the Rocky Mountains, at the head of the Platte and Arkansas, where Pike had seen traces of the band and their stock. From this point the Indians sent Pursley and 2 of their number to Santa Fe to trade. Here they arrived in June, 1805, 8 months before Pike, and Pursley decided to remain. Governor Alencastre decided to send Pike and his party to Chihuahua, accompanied by Robinson, who rejoined him at Albuquerque. Pike passed down the valley of the Rio Grande through El Paso under escort of the gallant and courteous Mulgairs, and was taken before Salcedo, the commander general of Chihuahua, on April 2nd. Leaving here late that month, still under escort, he crossed the Del Norte on June 1st, passed through San Antonio, and on July 1st was within the United States, at Natchitoches, when he exclaimed, "Language cannot express the gaiety of my heart when I once more beheld the standard of my country." It is astonishing what an amount of valuable and accurate information concerning New Spain was collected by Captain Pike during his journey through the country. If he had been permitted to return by the way of Red River, his stock of knowledge would have been vastly inferior. His journey was tedious, unpleasant, and humiliating, but Pike knew how to make the best of one situation, and in so doing justify the confidence of his superiors in sending him on so dangerous and important a service. His field notes in New Spain were made by Pike with great difficulty, as the governor gave orders to Malgares not to permit the making of astronomical observations nor the taking of notes. Pike was determined, however, to make the best of his opportunities, and so recorded his observations while making pretext to halt, and kept his boy as a vedette while writing. Later, he feared the loss of such notes as he had already made, when, he continues, "finding that a new species of discipline had taken place, and that the suspicions of my friend Malgares were much more acute than ever, I conceived it necessary to take some steps to secure the notes I had taken, which were clandestinely acquired. In the night I arose, and after making all my men clean their pieces well, I took my small books and rolled them up in small rolls, and tore a fine shirt to pieces, and wrapped it around the papers and put them down in the barrels of the guns, until we just left room for the tompions, which were then carefully put in. The remainder we secured about our bodies under our shirts. This was effected without discovery and without suspicions." Pike draws a lively and striking picture of the manners, morals, customs, and politics of the people of New Spain, whom he characterized as surprisingly brave, and in hospitality, generosity, and sobriety unsurpassed by any other people, but as lacking in patriotism, enterprise, and independence of soul. The subsequent career of Captain Pike was short and brilliant. He received the thanks of the government, had his zeal, perseverance, and intelligence formally recognized by a committee of the House of Representatives, rose to be major, lieutenant colonel, and deputy quartermaster general in rapid succession. In the reorganization of the army in 1812 was made colonel, and in the following year was appointed brigadier general a few weeks before his death at the capture of York, Toronto, Canada. The day before he left for the attack on York, Toronto, General Pike wrote to his father, "I embark to morrow in the fleet of Sackett's Harbor at the head of 1,500 choice troops on a secret expedition. Should I be the happy mortal destined to turn the scale of war, will you not rejoice, O my father? May Heaven be propitious and smile on the cause of my country. But if I am destined to fall, may my fall be like Wolfe's, to sleep in the arms of victory." His wish was prophetic. The orders issued to his troops indicate the high professional honor which ever characterized Pike's life. In part, they ran thus: "It is expected that every corps will be mindful of the honor of American arms and the disgraces which have recently tarnished our arms, and endeavor, by a cool and determined discharge of their duty, to support the one and wipe out the other. The property of the unoffending citizens of Canada," he continues, "must be held sacred, and any soldier who shall so far neglect the honor of his profession as to be guilty of plundering the inhabitants shall, if convicted, be punished with death. Courage and bravery in the field do not more distinguish the soldier than humanity after victory, and whatever examples the savage allies of our enemies may have given us, the general confidently hopes that the blood of an unresisting enemy will never stain the weapon of any soldier of his column." Owing to the sickness of General Dearborn, Pike took command of the land forces, and on April 27, 1813, carried the outer battery by assault, and having silenced the fire of the main work, was awaiting a white flag when the main magazine was exploded. Pike, who had a minute before assisted in making a wounded soldier comfortable, was fatally injured, but his martial spirit impelled him to yet encourage his troops. A soldier to the last, he smiled as the standard of the enemy was handed to him, and putting it under his head, died serenely. Laboring under the disadvantage of insufficient instruction in youth, Pike supplemented his deficiencies by assiduous application, and his journal shows him studying French and other languages in the interludes of his desperate journeys in the Northwest and Southwest. Simple-minded and warm-hearted, he won the devotion of his men without relaxing soldierly habits in impairing discipline. He was intelligent, indefatigable, brave, capable of great endurance, fertile in expedients, and never distrustful of his own capabilities or of the ultimate success of his undertakings. His early death precluded judgment as to his qualities as a general, but certainly he had the power of origination, organization, and administration which are essentials to military success. It should be recorded of his explorations that, taking into consideration his small force and almost inadequate means, no other man ever contributed to the geographical knowledge of the United States an amount comparable to that which the world owes to the heroic efforts and indomitable perseverance of Zebulon Montgomery Pike. End of Chapter 6, Part 2. Recording by William Tomko.